In 1765, American patriots of the 13 colonies initiated an open conflict with the British governmental monarchy. This conflict would last 23 long years and directly result in the death of over 6,000 American militia and continental soldiers. Furthermore, historians estimate an additional 17,000 or more citizens would die in the aftermath due to conflict-related disease, famine, or their time spent as a prisoner. The cost was heavy and the price was high, but the ultimate victory was a free and independent country called the United States of America. The aftermath of this conflict saw the nation grow to prosperity unrivaled in the free world. The American dream was a global reality. The idea that a nation of opportunity existed in which the yoke of tyrants had been thrown away and the boundless possibilities were now in the hands of the people. It was a wonderful dream, and a dream that to this very day inspires hope in the eyes of many around the world who wish to join it. However, the American dream has been changing. It doesn't change quickly like a gunshot with everyone alerted to exactly what has happened and when. It changes slowly, like paint drying, where you look away and look back to a seemingly identical scenario, but each time there are small differences. The stratification of wealth, the dilapidation of certain residential areas, and more recently the conflict of two separate and increasingly hostile, ideologically opposed political parties have all contributed to the civil unrest on a nearly unprecedented scale. All of these topics could be discussed for hours. How we got here, why we got here, what could change, why it should change. But that's not what I want to focus on for today. Today, I want to focus on the word revolution and make the case that America has a deceptive and dangerous relationship to that word. So much so, in fact, it is now being used by screaming masses in a campaign that would fundamentally destroy their own communities, and in truth, it already has in a number of major cities. But going further, there must be, at some point, a circuit breaker, because revolution now does not mean what it did back then. And somehow, some way, people are consumed by the deification of that concept. They are manipulated into a belief that revolution in today's world is akin to the struggle which built America in the first place. And this belief, sadly, is horribly dangerous. If you ask different people across the globe what revolution means to them, you will get very different answers. In America, they might say it is the opportunity to overthrow a tyrannical force that oppresses the people, and it would be accurate for their circumstances. It is something that must happen for the greater good of all. If you ask someone in France, though, you might get a very different answer. The reasons for this are many, but with a focus on the French religious revolutionary wars, historians estimate that between 2 and 4 million people died as a result of famine, disease, and conflict. I put out an open call as I write this to my audiences on social media. I asked them to define the word revolution as they see it. Not the dictionary term, not the technical definition, the word as they see it according to the history of their own country. Dartstone, in one of the responses, said the following: France, making radical changes without thinking them out thoroughly, making lots of people suffer, and doesn't change much in the long run. Then there was Bartos, who wrote, "For me, and I am Polish, revolution has a mainly negative meaning, because it's tangled with communists who did many, many horrible things and have enslaved us for years. Revolution never brings anything good, just bloodshed." Now contrast this to some of the answers from the United States. Ronnie Phillips wrote, USA, revolution means standing up to injustice and fighting back, but a fight doesn't always have to be violent. Josh Thompson wrote, USA, revolution is change. Sometimes it's righteous, sometimes it's utilitarian, but what it ultimately comes down to is an old and untenable system being reborn like a phoenix. It's clearly different, but it has the same components/people as it did before the fiery transformation. These are extremely different points of view because at the core of the word's definition are entirely different historical events. As an example, the Chinese Communist Revolution, also known as the War of Liberation, resulted in the People's Republic of China, a governmental body that we in America know today as a horribly authoritarian regime that executes atrocities on an untold scale. This government was born from the ashes of a revolution, but it was not a revolution that would conform to the idealistic definitions that I or many others in the United States might propose. I'm going to link to this Twitter thread down below because the many voices stating what revolution means to them, it's really powerful to read. These are perspectives from all around the world with totally different ideas and impressions of what a revolution is and how it affects the people involved. Because all of these areas have uniquely shaped visions that are passed down through generations and have completely different internalized effects through lived experience. Bottom line, revolution is not an easily defined word, and it is certainly not something that can be measured and quantified on a consistent basis. For every famous revolution that is chronicled in the history books as a benefit to their society, there are 10 more that were violent, destructive, and unceremoniously put down to the detriment of all those involved. My argument is this, and I will clarify and define why I think this way and how it has changed. But my argument is that revolution now and revolution in 1765 are entirely separate and totally different circumstances that cannot and should not be compared, because equating them is dangerous and reckless. America has a deceptive relationship to the word, and those illusions must be shattered, because allowing them to continue in the face of newfound cries for revolution, it could have catastrophic ramifications. I'd like to take a moment now and address why I'm structuring the video the way that I am. YouTube is very, very strict and has always changing conditions on what and how you are allowed to discuss modern political or controversial events. I'm focusing the video on America's relationship to the word and concept, and not the graphic series of events that sparked this controversy or the ongoing violence that was born from them, because doing so gives a greater chance that the video will be left alone and not pulled from the searches or otherwise suppressed. I understand that there are terrible events unfolding across the nation right now, events that make it appealing and desirable to unify under a motivating and powerful term such as revolution. But that term is damaging and deceptive because the framework and requirements for its success, they are not there, and perhaps they never will be in the same way again. That is not to say that positive change cannot come, or that it should not come, but coalescing around that word, it is not noble, it is not safe, and it is based on a specter of hope that no longer applies the same way in the modern world. So what has changed? The biggest difference between now and then is community resource production. The United States of America was born when an entirely independent group of colonies rebelled against a government across the entire ocean. This is not to say that there was not death and destruction. There absolutely was. But all major economic systems necessary for a free and self-sufficient nation, they existed. And they existed immediately in their own communities. There were no national shipping routes to haul in essential supplies for individual communities and families. There were supply chains for armies, absolutely, but the vast majority of American communities relied on a small local web of farms, carpenters, smiths, and other tradesmen who would operate with a cycle: produce, save, endure the winter. Produce, save, endure. The final grievance, the act that has been time and time again compared to the destruction and crime plaguing American cities these past few days, is the Boston Tea Party, where colonists threw barrels of tea into the harbor to protest the increasingly severe tax rates. This is an iconic moment in American history, and rightly so, but it also signifies the actual relationship between the colonies and the British Empire. America did not need the British Empire. They did not need to have their shipments taxed, and the direction that resources moved was almost unilaterally one-sided. Resources and revenue were taken from America by the British Empire, and very little was provided in return. The Revolutionary War was a severance of control more than anything else. The systems by which food would be produced, distributed, and stored, they already existed. They were damaged in the war, but they existed nonetheless. The framework for an operational country was never being attacked. It was used as collateral damage by the British Empire, but the colonists themselves were never rebelling against their own communities and infrastructure. They were rebelling against a defined and unnecessary foreign occupier. This is no longer the case. Centuries of globalization have left America with an entirely different economic landscape, and this reality seems to have been missed or ignored by those who equate these riots to the Revolutionary War. Over time, America began to produce less and less. We now import huge quantities of essential items from other nations. We ship integral supplies across the country in a spiderweb of operations which allow for individual communities to produce absolutely nothing and still enjoy access to resources year-round. This complexity is beneficial to our modern way of life, but has only ever been increasing. First it was farms tended to by your neighbors, then it was larger farms a mile away, then giant stretching fields with trucks that ship to other states, and finally, what we have now, is centralized farms that produce a lion's share of all the corn, wheat, fruits, vegetables, and other food, then ship it across the nation, or even import the rest from neighboring countries, to be dispersed by private shipping companies or trucking routes, down to a community level eventually, where we enjoy uninterrupted access to whatever we want. This is just one item, food. Make no mention of fresh water and the reliance on government-maintained pipelines, oil, gas, and other heating resources, which again are largely dependent on a supply chain that has many tightly cooperating segments. When you consider all of this, it becomes clear that contrary to the events hundreds of years ago when America won her independence, these riots today are actually attacking the very structures they rely on, wreaking havoc on systems that they need, but they are too angry and blinded to consider that. At first, a target was looted, and the logic formed around companies having insurance, and they're insanely wealthy, they're billionaire corporations, so it's accepted, it doesn't matter. Then, when even more retail stores were destroyed, it shifted into a justification that necessary supplies and other consumables could be shipped in to people, because who even shops at retail stores anymore? Then, they destroyed the post office and started attacking Amazon shipping trucks. The framework at almost every single level has been attacked and destroyed because the literal foundation of life in this country is now perceived as the enemy. If the police are the enemy, the government is. If the government is, the system is. If the system is, the corporations are. And if the corporations are, the infrastructure is. And the logic descends from something where change is possible to total self-destruction. A metaphor I keep coming back to is water in a home, but the pipes contain lead. At first, you might not even realize. The effects can be very, very slow. But then, over time, more and more, you begin to see and feel the changes. Your health deteriorates, the sickness increases, and finally, some sort of event sparks off a moment of crisis, and it's time to act. So what do? There are many different options here. You could begin to replace one segment of pipe per day with the help of those that understand the process, learning for yourself, and eventually becoming very well versed in solving the problem. It would be slow, but progress would be made towards better and more consistent health. Or you could lay out pipes in an organized way and then replace them all at once. It would be a much more difficult task, to be sure, but it would also decrease the time necessary. Or you can hype yourself up into a rage and begin ripping pipes out of the floor and the wall with random ferocity, destroying your own home and other appliances because you are just angry and tired and don't want the water to have lead anymore. Fundamentally, yes, you solve the problem and will no longer be drinking water with lead in it, but the reality that sets in when the dust fades is that you will no longer be drinking water, period. The rebuilding can be done, but that process is now a trial of survival because all reason was sacrificed and blind rage destroyed the structure you rely on. I have been seeing time and time again the most disgusting rhetoric being thrown around, such as murder all cops and abolish the police, go after the rich, destroy the corporations. Corporations don't mean anything compared to human life, burn them down, and around it goes. The thing is, all of these systems are necessary. You may not like it, we may have failed as a nation to get to this point at all, but these systems do not become any less necessary because you hate them. In 2013, I was in college during the Boston bombings. I remember a campus-wide lockdown and an atmosphere of sheer terror, watching the news for every single update, and finally, days later, seeing that the culprits had been captured. A few hours after the announcement, I traveled to the Commons with my roommate. We carried American flags with us and joined a small crowd gathering at the gazebo to celebrate. Over the next few hours, it became a crowd of thousands. The police were there, some of them after 72 continuous hours of sleepless pursuit. There were cheers and chants because the terrorists had been captured and the danger had passed. Students and citizens hugged the police, shook their hands, they cried with them, and thanked them for their tireless and dangerous work protecting the people of Boston from a threat that had violated their safety in every conceivable way. The atmosphere was one of relief, celebration, and appreciation, and I will never, ever forget that night or the rush of emotion I felt. When you call for the police to be abolished or to be killed, when you attack them indiscriminately and burn their vehicles, surround them and pelt them with bricks, you are calling for the destruction of not just those instances where you perceive wrong to have been done. You are attempting to destroy all of it. You are losing the protection from terrorist threats. You are losing every single good thing they do and ever will do. And as much as people in their blind emotional rage want to deny it and call them all criminals, that loss will hurt more than it helps. Destroying the companies means destroying the employment prospects. Destroying the businesses of your neighbors means destroying the livelihood of people who suffer the same wrongs right alongside you because you are so deluded and angry, seeking to express your pain, that you take out that anger on innocent citizens who only seek to be there with you, feeling the same things that you do. America has a deceptive relationship with the word revolution because our nation was formed when a revolution cut the ties to a foreign and unnecessary occupier. Today, there is no foreign and unnecessary occupier. Some of us may view certain services or businesses to be individually unnecessary, but the fundamental framework of our nation, food, water, fuel, shipping, emergency services such as firefighters, medics, these are services that are necessary because without them, most communities simply cannot exist. It may sound like a straw man, an argument made in bad faith, but the reality is rioters are now blocking fire trucks from fighting fires deliberately set in occupied buildings and homes. The rhetoric has become one of revolution on social media, and I sincerely ask everyone to understand why it is wrong, why it is dangerous, and why it needs to end. The riots of 2020 are not comparable in any legitimate way to the American Revolution. America has problems, it has issues, and those issues very much need to be addressed. These protests, and these are two very separate and distinct words, riots versus protests, these protests have a message, they have a goal, and they can have a positive impact. But the riots, they have no goal. They have no message, and defending them at all in any capacity by somehow drawing parallels to the enigmatically successful revolution that formed our very country, it is intellectual dishonesty which cannot be supported. For a revolution to be successful, especially when tearing down critical systems, far-reaching critical systems like food, water, fuel, and more, it must replace those systems with something else, something better, or at least something good enough, at the very least, to avoid the catastrophe of having nothing at all. That integral component was not necessary for America as it was born, because in truth, America was not born from any ashes. It merely shook off the yoke of tyrannical control, fully realizing the systems it already had. The 2020 riots are not producing any form of replacement. They are not constructing something to supplement what is being destroyed actively or what they seek to tear down. They are simply devastating systems that are necessary for hundreds of thousands of people, even millions, possibly more, in their everyday life. There should be no calls for revolution if this is truly what revolution means. Earlier today, I saw a post about how mainstream media might have used footage from the movie World War Z as if it were America on their broadcast, and I exclaimed in my own tweet about how if that's true, it's absurd and people should be fired. Within minutes, it became clear that this was a falsification. Someone had manipulated the footage, overlaid the MSN news banner, and posted it to trick the frenzied masses. I immediately posted 2 clarifications down below, within, I believe, 3 minutes of the tweet going live. I thought nothing more of it. A few people had said thanks for the follow-up or something similar, and I moved to this video itself, working on the script. A few hours later, I returned to find that the post had 6,000 likes and climbing, 1,000 or 2 retweets, I don't remember exactly, most of which thought the image was real, having not read my clarification, and my inbox inundated with absolute garbage, raging at me for promoting fake news. It is so easy to play on the hysteria. I did it accidentally, and with 15 minutes of Photoshop or some SEO research and the right hashtags, anyone out there can and is actively doing it time and time again. We cannot view this to be the new normal. Hyperbole on this scale, anarchy is what it truly is, has no basis in reality, and any parallel drawn between the Revolutionary War and modern rioting, or as demented as that comparison is, this modern revolution, must be rightfully and critically dismantled as nothing more than the rantings of those with a total and fundamental lack of understanding when it comes to history, economics, infrastructure, and the necessity for a free and civil society to maintain certain systems at the very least. Else it risks widespread death, destruction, poverty, starvation, and so much more. That's it though. America has a deceptive relationship with the word revolution. It can mean something good. It can represent positive change, but it can also be used all too often as a rallying cry with no rhyme or reason by individuals with no desire to understand the ramifications of their own actions, merely using it to capitalize on and participate in the addictive drug of adrenaline-fueled mob rage. It's wrong, and it needs to end. Links down below to support. I'll cut it there. Thank you for watching.